So I got this question that says, how do I produce a sales report by preferred vendor? I think what they mean is when I go into QuickBooks Desktop, for example, I'm going to go into the item list and I'm going to go to any specific item. I'm going to right click on the item and click on edit. Every item has a preferred vendor assigned to it. So the question says, how do I do a sales report by preferred vendor? Technically speaking, the preferred vendor is used in a purchase transaction, not in a sales transaction. So QuickBooks cannot produce a sales report based on possibly where you bought the product originally. However, there are ways to kind of get around this. So now that you know that this is where the preferred vendor information is, let's go ahead and click on OK. And I'm going to escape out of this and I'm going to produce an item listing report that gives me the item name and the preferred vendor next to it. So I'm going to go to Reports, List, Item Price List. Actually, just item listing. So Reports, List, and then Item Listing. I'm going to go to that. And then I'm going to remove all those fields and just have the item name and the preferred vendor next to it. So I'm going to go to Customize Report and I'll get rid of everything, description, all that stuff. I'm just going to have item. And then the other one I'm going to have is preferred vendor. And then I'm going to click OK. So there we go. So I got a list of my items and my preferred vendor next to it. So the second part of the question is, how do I get the sales by the preferred vendor, not by the item? So let's park that. Let's put our item listing here to the left because we're going to need that information at some point. Now, the built-in sales reports are in QuickBooks. It's report, sales, sales by item summary. So I can do that. But the sales by item summary has no way of grouping my sales based on the preferred vendor. I mean, these items have a preferred vendor component, an attribute, but I can't tell QuickBooks to group it by vendor. There's just no way of doing it. There's no option for me to do preferred vendor. I can pick vendor here, but that doesn't do anything because preferred vendor is a different concept of vendor. So essentially what we need is we need to export this report into Excel and then add the preferred vendor next to each item and then create whatever additional reports we want to do. So let's do an example, but I won't do it from this report. I'm going to do it from the transaction detail report because it's going to give me much more information. It'll give me customer name. It'll give me dollar amount per item. It'll give me quantity, that sort of thing. So let me X out of that. Then I'm going to go to reports. Then I'm going to go into custom reports and then transaction details. Transaction detail, custom reports. For dates, I'm going to select all dates. For now, I don't know what dates I want, all dates. Under filter, I'm going to tell it I only want information from invoices, from sales receipts, and from credit memos, which are the three type of transactions that essentially affect my sales. So I'm going to go to transaction type. I'll search it here real quick. Transaction type, and I'm going to change it from all to multiple. In multiple, I'll pick invoice, sales receipt, and credit memo. So those three, invoice, sales receipt, and credit memo, and then click OK, and then OK. And I got a bunch of information, maybe too much. Let's just narrow it down to just the specific information we want. So I'm going to go to Customize Report. Then I'm going to go to Filters. Then I look for Detail Level. So what Detail Level does is only shows me the line items or the header or the summary of the invoice. So at this point, I'm going to select All Except Summary because I don't want all these debits and credits craziness. I just want the details, specific sales inside of it. Then I'm going to click OK. Now, because I have inventory parts, QuickBooks is going to give me three numbers. It's going to give me the sales amount, which is this credit here. Then it's going to give me my asset reduction, money being moved, the value being moved from my inventory asset to my cost of goods sold. And then the debit will be the cost of goods sold. I don't need all that. Maybe I do need all that, depending on what I'm trying to achieve. So if I'm looking for profit by preferred vendor, I would need that account to be in there. But for the most part, let's say we're just looking at sales, only concentrated on sales. So we're going to go to Customize Report. Then we're going to go to Filters. Then we're going to go to Account Filter. And instead of having all accounts, we're going to go down and select all ordinary income accounts. So all ordinary income accounts, that way it doesn't show me my cost of goods sold or my inventory asset. Then I click OK. And there it is. There's all my sales by all ordinary income. So let's talk about the fields that we want. Do we want type? Maybe we do. Let's leave it there. Do we want the date? Yes. Invoice number? Maybe. Let's leave it. Customer? Let's have that. Memo? Let's get rid of that. I don't need a memo. Account? Let's say I don't need the account. And then clear? I don't need that. Split? I don't need that. And there shouldn't be any debits, only credits, because those are sales. But if there's a credit memo returning a sale, you would have a sale in there. So instead of having debit credit, I'm just going to search for amount. Here under, I clicked on customize report, and then under display, I'm going to do amount. And then I'll get rid of credit and debit. That way I can have a net amount. So if there's a credit memo, that would show us a negative, and that's accurate. I'll get rid of balance as well. Now there's some additional fields we can bring in here, such as quantity. So let's bring quantity in here. So we'll bring quantity in there as a column. We'll also bring price, sales price, and then we click OK. So that way we have the total amount, we have the individual sales price, and then we have the quantity. So if I click on customize report, there's all sorts of different things that we can add in there. Not everything can be added. Okay, let's bring in the description too. That would be useful too. Let's bring the description, and then we click OK. So we got this long descriptions in here. So we got the item name. We got the, actually we're missing the item name. That would be useful. So let's go to customize report, and let's get item. That's probably the most important one, because we're going to need that one to reference to the other report. And then we click OK. So at this point, I'm going to memorize this report, and let's call it sales detail by item, something like that, and save it. That way, if that's the sound that it makes when you memorize a report. So once it's saved, I can close it, and I can go back to reports, memorize reports, and pull it back up. That way, if I'm pulling this report many times in the future, I want to have that information handy. So there's my two reports. I got my item listing, which I probably should memorize as well. So let me do that, memorize, and let's just call it item and preferred vendor. So I got my two items set. So I got two reports set up. I got my item and preferred vendor, and then I have my detail item report. Now what I need to do is I need to export both of these into Excel, and I need to do a VLOOKUP to bring the preferred vendor into the main table. So then I can run a pivot table and create a report from there. So let's see what that looks like. Let's start by exporting this one to Excel. So I'm going to go to Excel, create new worksheet. Then I'm going to click on advanced, because I don't want extra data to come in there. So I'm going to get rid of create backup. I'm going to get rid of include, export, whatever that is. I'll get rid of auto fit, get rid of freeze panes, get rid of show guidelines. I'll get rid of all this stuff. Basically, I don't want a lot of extra information in there. I just want sort of the raw data. So I'm going to click OK, and then click on export and see what happens. There it is. Straight flat table, item and preferred vendor. So let's save that in Excel. Let's just put it to the side here, and then we'll close the report in QuickBooks. Don't need that anymore. And now let's export the main transaction table. So let's go into Excel, advance. Okay, all the settings are good. Click OK, and then export. Perfect. So there's my two tables. So what I'm going to do is, let me minimize QuickBooks for a second, because we're not going to be in QuickBooks anymore. Let's put these two next to each other so they're a little bit easier to read. So the first thing I'm going to do is on the main data table, the one that has most of the data, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the empty lines and rows that I don't need. So I'll get rid of that and get rid of that. So I'm good to go there. Let me scroll down, see if there's any subtotal. Yes, there's a subtotal. Let me get rid of that too and delete that. So now I got 45 lines of 10 different invoices that I sold, and I have all sorts of information here: customer name, item, description, quantity, sales price, and total amount. Beautiful. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in this table that's got the preferred vendor, and I'm going to click and drag that to the right and put it next to the main data table. Okay, and let's maximize this in Excel, and then we'll call this one sales. So I'm just naming the sheet itself, and we call this one vendor, something like that. Okay, so now we're good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new column here called preferred vendor. Okay, got too many R's in there. So I got preferred vendor. What I want to do is I want to tell Excel to look up this item name inside this table and return the preferred vendor next to it. The best way to do that is to select this data set. I'm gonna hit Control A to select the entire amount of information, and then I'm gonna give this table a name. So I'm gonna call this vendors. So I'm basically literally just typing in the table name up here, and then I'm gonna press enter. So now, if I were to select that data set, it's now called vendors. So now I don't need to use a formula to figure out where the data is coming from. I just type vendors to refer to that table array, and the VLOOKUP is going to be much easier. So let me go back into sales, and then here on the preferred vendor, I'm going to click equals VLOOKUP. And then what am I looking up? I'm looking up the item, and then on what table array? So I'll do comma and then type vendors. Remember, that's the table array that we named, vendors. And then which column index or which column are we going to return? We're going to return the second column. The first column was the item name. That's what it's going to search. And then the result is that preferred vendor. So we're going to put column 2. And then the range lookup. Don't ask me why. I'm just going to type false in close parentheses. So that's the formula right there. All right, so we're going to search the item name in the vendors table, which is in that other sheet, return the result from the second column, and then false, not to do a range lookup. So look up other VLOOKUP videos to explain what that true and false means. For now, it's just false. I'll press enter, and then this is going to now return dynamically that piece of information. So I'm just going to click and drag that little box to the bottom, so all the information gets pre-filled. Beautiful. That's it. That's all I need to do. So now I'm going to select that column and hit copy, and then paste values, because I don't want that to be a formula anymore. That way it's a fixed data set. I can come here to this tab. I can just get rid of this tab completely. Perfect. So now that we got rid of that tab, we basically have our raw data that we need here. And the original question said sales by preferred vendor. So then what we need to do is to do a pivot table to pivot that data pretty much the way that you want. So I'm going to select any data point there, click on Control A to do a select all, then click on insert in the insert tab in the top, and then I'm going to click on pivot table. Now in the pivot table, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. If you're familiar with pivot tables, I guess you know what to do at this point, but if you're not, this will be an awesome little introduction. Pivot tables are incredible. I'm going to go to preferred vendor. There it is on the fields, and I'm going to click and drag that to rows. So now I have all my preferred vendors set up, and then we have our quantity and our sales price, and that's going to be over in our columns. So I'm going to bring quantity over to columns, and actually no, that's not right. It's not under columns, it's under value. So I'm going to click and drag that into value. There it is. So those are the quantities, and then we got the sales price. So click and drag that into values, and there it is. So here's my quantity of items I sold for that preferred vendor, and then here is my total dollar value. So at this point, I can start doing some formatting, but let's do that afterwards. We also want the item name. So let's bring the item name over and click and bring that down into rows. So that's going to be right there under vendor, preferred vendor. So now these are going to be grouped by preferred vendor, then the item, and then we got our quantities and our sales price. Let's also bring the description over. Let's bring that. I'm going to click and drag description down to rows. So now it looks like we have sort of have 3 layers into this. So we're going to clean this up and organize it so the report is a little bit easier to read. So we're going to click up here where it says design for the pivot table. And let's do blank rows. Let's insert one after each item. And then on the report layout, let's do the tabular format. It's a little bit easier to read. And then we're also going to repeat all the item labels. That's going to make more sense once we start cleaning this up. Grand totals, let's do off the grand totals, and then subtotals, let's do that at the bottom. Okay, so now we can start making this a little bit smaller here and start grouping these things together. Let's do a little bit more cleanup. Instead of doing subtotals, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click subtotals and don't show the subtotals. And then here on the report layout, we did the tabular format. Let's see what the outline format looks like. That might work. It works pretty well. Let's see if we can do tabular format. I think I like tabular format better. And then let's do here, repeat all item labels. Okay, this will work right here. So I can collapse this preferred vendor or open it, and here's my item, my sales. If I want to get rid of that blank row, I can click on remove and make this a little bit tighter, and this will work. So I can, at any point in time, I can minimize any of these by clicking on that little minus sign, and then I have my total, right? Or I can expand any of them and then get the full detail, right? By description, by item name, however I want it. So multiple ways of doing this, and this report is all sales, all dates. So I can also bring in my date component up here, grab the date and put it up here over filters, and then come here into the drop-down menu and see what we can do. So we can actually only select, let's say, our October sales, or only do our January sales, right? So I can actually have a lot of flexibility when it comes to pivot tables. And there's a lot more things you can do with pivot tables, but for the purpose of that video, we'll stop it there. So hopefully that was helpful. So let's add some bonus content, right? I get a similar question from people that say, I want to see sales by region, or sales by country, or sales by state. Within the same theme here, what we're going to do is we're going to go into customers and click on Customer Center, and then show you kind of where this information comes from. So I'm going to double click on any of these customers here, and then click on this little edit button, and see that we're filling out this information that says country, region. So within the same theme, I want to now do sales by region. So the way we would do that is we have to make sure that every one of these customers has the country or region set up. And then we're going to follow the exact same principle, but then we're going to run a different report to get the customer and region next to it. So we're going to go into reports, and then we're going to go to list, and then we're going to go to customer phone list. That one works. We'll start off that. And then there it is. There's my customer and the phone number next to it. We don't care about the phone number. We care about the country or region. So I'm going to click on customize report, top left, and then we're going to look for country. Click on country right there and click OK. And there it is. Let me get rid of this main phone. I don't need that. So there's my customer name and my country next to it. So I'm going to follow the same exact concept. I'm going to export this spreadsheet out. There it is. Let me minimize QuickBooks for a second. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in, let's delete this pivot table that we're working on completely. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring in this data set. Let me delete any extras here. So there's my customer and my country. Perfect. And then we're going to call this region, whatever it happens to be. Then I'm going to click and drag that sheet onto my main sales spreadsheet. There it is. Then I'm going to select the entire data set and call this region. Again, we're naming the tables. We're naming the array. Press enter. There it is. Maximize Excel. Go back into sales. And I'll add another column called region, country or region. Same thing. VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP now the customer. And VLOOKUP the customer name, not the item name. Look it up under the region table. Table array, that's it. Column 2 and then false. Okay, so that's the formula for this one. Press enter. Beautiful. Click and drag that down. And that's basically resolving every customer name to its country or region. Copy this and paste values. Okay, save the spreadsheet. Get rid of this. I don't need this anymore. Delete that. Now let's do another pivot table. Insert pivot table. Okay. So on the fields on the right side, we're going to look for region, and we're going to click and drag that onto rows. There it is. There's my 3 regions. Then let's bring over, let's say, preferred vendor. So we're going to take it one step further. Preferred vendor under region. And then let's just bring in total amount. Let's say I'm not interested in quantity and sales, just total amount. Click and drag that down to values, and there it is. I'm going to go back into design, maybe insert some blank spaces, and then we'll off the grand totals, and then just do a subtotal in the bottom. Subtotal in the bottom, there it is. So there's Canada, my sales by preferred vendor, total sales for Canada. Mexico, sales by preferred vendor, total sales in Mexico, and so forth. I can change the formatting of this. right? So it makes a little bit more sense with dollar values. So you get the point. There's a lot of powerful things we can do in Excel with pivot tables, getting the data from QuickBooks into Excel. Unfortunately, it's a lot of work pushing that data out to Excel and doing all this manual work. My email's down there. If you want some suggestions on how to automate these processes, we use a couple of third-party apps. One is called QCube. The other one is called FinGenie. Depending on what you're trying to do, one app might make sense more than the other. Now, a little bit of warning, these apps cost anywhere between $500 and $2,000, depending on how many licenses and how many QuickBooks files and that sort of thing. Plus, you might need a little bit of training to learn how to use these apps to automate this. But if you're not afraid of doing your own exports and VLOOKUPs and doing this with pivot tables, it might take you 20, 30 minutes per report and you could save some money. But if time is of the essence, get one of those apps. Just email me. I'll give you the suggestions and hopefully you can automate some of these reports. Thanks. Click subscribe, hit like, add some comments below. What other sort of inventory, sales related reports would you like to see? Hope you liked it, and I'll see you on the next one.